Hey, thanks for checking out some of our mental health resources. We just been in our series called Weeds. This is a series about mental health. We all know and care about someone who's struggling, or maybe we're struggling, because we know there are a lot of people struggling. And Jesus says that's not how we're meant to live. So at Northwest Christian Church, we've said we're just not going to continue to sit back. We have to do something. And so this series is for those who need hope and those who also want to help. Just like every garden, lawn, or flower bed has weeds, every one of us struggles at times. We may show roses, but we all have some weeds. Now, we recognize that we can't address everything in a 30-minute message. So what we've done is we've created this resource page to give additional help and hope. And each week, we're going to have an interview with a professional counselor about the topic of that week. We're going to have some other resources available as well. This week, we talked about anxiety and worry. And we're saying, remember, it's okay to admit that we're not okay. In other words, it's okay to be honest about our weeds. Now, super excited to have Abe with us. So thank you for being willing to do this. Welcome back. Can you tell us a little bit more about who you are, what your practice is all about? I hear a little bit of an accent.
Yeah. Good to be here again, Dave. And I'm Abe Hatch, an Aussie psychologist, now working as a licensed professional counselor in America. I have a private practice. I focus primarily on attachment relationships, helping couples heal from wounds, traumas, issues that have caused, separation or betrayal. And I also help parents with attachment issues with their children. And I work with mood disorders, anxiety, and depression primarily.
So you see a lot of different things.
I do, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the landscape now, right, with mental health issues? Yeah. In particular, maybe what you see, what some of your colleagues see?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I touched on some of the negative trends that are happening. One of the positive trends that's happening here at the moment, you could call it the age of therapy. We had the age of asylum to begin with mental health problems, and we saw it as a very, stereotyped, difficult stigma subject. And now we're moving towards the age of therapy, where it's being accepted, promoted, and seen as a good thing to go and get some help. Moving a little bit away from primarily seeing medication as the answer to relationships as being a really fundamental need for people. There's a good book called Lost Connections, which really demonstrates the importance of connection.
Okay. So what do you see currently with specifically on our topic this week, anxiety and worry, in your practice or maybe even culture as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually moving to America from Australia a few years back, I noticed the pace of American life. We are all aware of it. We talk about it a lot. Oregon's probably a little slower than some of the bigger cities, but it's fast, and people are anxious. People are worried. Our children are really experiencing it a lot. 1 in 4 adolescents and children are experiencing some form of anxiety. 11-year-olds are diagnosed more than any other age.
11-year-olds?
11-year-olds. A lot of the time people go untreated, dealing with worry and anxiety. They just think it's a part of how their life's going to be. They don't realize that they can work on it. They can do better. Out of COVID, anxiety was particularly high. Some of the issues that were simultaneous with COVID in American life, particularly political unrest, familial breakdown. There's been a big change in how we relate to the older generations and younger generations. There's been a big sociological shift, which has caused a lot of anxiety as well.
So what tells me or what tells somebody that the way that I'm anxious about something or the way I'm worrying that it's really not healthy and that I need to do something about that? What helps us understand that better? Yeah,
I love that question. I think it's really important to think about anxiety as normal. I feel a little right now because there's cameras on us, we're talking, I want to do it right, and that's normal. That's an appropriate level of anxiety for the situation. So we all have anxiety about different things in our lives. When it becomes a problem, and I like to describe it a little bit like a scene. You imagine an ocean, beautiful sunset, calm, waves, warm. And imagine the music playing in the background being classical music or something really pleasant. And then use the same scene and put shark music to the back of it or horror music to the back of it. All of a sudden you start thinking shark's going to come out of the water, or someone's going to run at you, or something bad's about to happen, someone's drowning or something like that. And anxiety is a lot like that. It colors our experience, and we have this powerful system called the limbic system, which is really designed to scan for threat. And it's not just physical threat, social threat too. We are so hardwired for connection that if we are anticipating some kind of social threat being rejected or abandoned or mocked, our anxiety can be really high as well.
Wow. So where can we get some help? I mean, obviously we're a church and we believe that we're a faith community and we believe life groups, so we think that's important. And you talked about connection, but how do we get some of those connections in the church, maybe do that better? Or what are some other resources for somebody who's really struggling with anxiety or really worried has crossed the line?
Yeah. If your anxiety is disproportionate to the situations you're in, and what I mean by that is you're constantly overwhelmed with worry, or if you're in a situation and there shouldn't be anxiety, it's not life-threatening or a dangerous situation, but you're really overwhelmed by that feeling, which is often a bodily feeling, heart thumping, sweaty, pressure, can't breathe, those sorts of symptoms. You do need help. You can feel better. Talking to someone about what specifically is underneath that anxiety can really help unlock peace and harmony within. And so much of anxiety is an internal conflict that we're having. And we don't often have spaces that we can talk about what's going on deeply within us. We can do that with a pastor, we can do that with a close friend, we can do that with a counselor. But getting to what's really going on inside me, what am I really fearing? What am I warring with myself about? So much of anxiety is about sort of something that's unrecognized inside us, internal conflicts that we're having, where we could describe it as parts of self, where there's a part of us that's in disagreement with another part of us, or we haven't been able to integrate those two things. And that causes pressure inside when we don't have internal harmony, we're not integrated in that way. An example, I've got a client that I was working with for some time that would get so much anxiety about their messy house. They would come home, they'd see the dishes, they'd see the mess, and get really overwhelmed, and that's not supposed to be something that makes us that anxious, is it? And all the home bodies are probably going, yeah, it is. But that level where you can't sleep and you're procrastinating, and so much of anxiety is about avoidance, which we can talk about too. What that person hadn't done was realize that there's some issues from their life that they haven't addressed, and one of them was they didn't want to accept that they have responsibilities in life. They still very much felt like they were a child, and as a child, they didn't have very much autonomy. And so, big example, but really illustrates that we need to do some work, right, to get to, hey, we might need to accept a few things about how life's going to be. And that doesn't have to be something that we have pressure. If we just get rid of that pressure, we can do the things, and we don't need to be worried about those things.
So let me ask this, it's a two-part question.
Yeah.
What would not be helpful with somebody who's anxious, but also how do I help somebody who is anxious, even if that somebody is myself?
Yeah, absolutely. What's not helpful is invalidating, saying don't worry about it, let it go, those sorts of things. Because for anxiety in particular, we can't just let it go. We can't just not worry about it. We're often experiencing some kind of diffuse, you could say, emotion that isn't well defined. And so we don't know what we're worrying about. We're just worrying about worry. So what's helpful is to investigate further. What's really helpful is to be really curious and gentle with someone when they're anxious and they're worried. I'm reminded of my son, who's 3, and we had just had a bad interaction where I raised my voice a bit at him. He was being mean to his little sister, who's 1. We're upstairs and I said, stop that, and I probably could have done a better job of being more gentle with him. We're down at the table and he's fidgety, he's anxious. And I hadn't connected what was going on for him. And I was like, what are you doing? He's playing with all the stuff and he's really quite nervous and fidgety. And it struck me. I hadn't asked him. I didn't investigate. I didn't get curious with him. And his name's Howie. I said, Howie, are you feeling a little sad about what happened upstairs? And he just melted. And he showed me what he was really feeling. I'm really sad. I didn't like how that went down. He was feeling a bit of shame about how he was acting as well. And so that's often what we need, someone just to be curious with us.
I love that. Yeah. That's great. For a church, is there some ways that we can do better? Maybe not creating some anxious moments sometimes, but what can we do for people who say, I need some help, or I just feel like I need to talk to somebody, or anxious, or what else in general for a church?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're doing here is a good start, doing education, helping people feel normal for having worry, having anxiety, helping people feel accepted in those spaces. Anxiety is really about fear. And so anything we can do to create safety. And I think sometimes safety is really showing softness, being gentle with people. I used to have on my door, working with children with fear and anxiety, I reminded myself, soft face, soft hands, because whatever's going to activate our stress response system and make us feel anxious would be any threat, any sense of threat. So if we have churches that are diffusing and safe, and relationships that are real, experiences that are corrective and healing, we can feel safe there. We don't have to be anxious there.
Now, as a parent and now as a grandparent, sometimes we get concerned about our kids, or we feel like they're maybe going over the edge or something like that. And you talked about being curious, but are there other things as a parent that I should be paying attention to, or as a grandparent paying attention to with my grandchildren, and say, man, that's just a little bit over the edge, or how can I help identify that, and what would I do to be able to communicate that, not becoming their parent, but also as a grandparent talking to their parents, or however that would work?
Yeah, that's really good. It's complex, a question like that, but I think primarily it's really important to investigate what's underneath it. And for that child or, grandchild to feel safe to share what's going on for them. We have these primal anxieties. There's a book, I think by David Foster, it's called The 7 Primal Questions, which kind of touches on this, but researchers touched on this for decades now about we have these developmental anxieties that are universal. Fear of losing our parents' love, fear of being bad, fear of bodily harm, fear of abandonment. And the last one is an interesting one. It's fear of annihilation, fear that somehow we will cease to exist, or we won't be mentally represented in our caregiver. So often what's underneath children and adolescent anxiety, and even adults, is these deeper fears. Am I bad? Right now for me, even as I'm talking to you, a little bit of like, am I doing a good job, right? Those primal questions. Do I matter? Or am I successful? We want the answer to be yes. Right. And so there's a lot of pressure on us to...
So as a parent or a grandparent, then I just reinforce, Abe, you're doing a great job. I mean that sincerely, but is that what you're talking about? Or what, as a parent, what can we do?
Yeah, I think part of that is helping them express when they don't feel that way. Often, you're a good boy, don't worry about it. But we might want to say, hey, what made you feel that way? Showing curiosity. It's like, okay that you feel that way. We don't need to kind of override that. Humans have this amazing ability to master their emotions if they're given the right conditions.
That's not always sitting down, right? It's sometimes those teachable moments, or it's at the dinner table, like you had with your son Howie.
Yeah, we call those ports of entry is one way of putting it. There's moments where we don't force it. But yeah, wait for that port to open up. You know what it's like with young boys. It's in the car, or it's when you're shooting hoops or something like that, right? Yeah.
Well, thanks again for being here, and thanks for sharing. We're going to have some other resources available. We're probably going to get some of those books. Is there anything else that you want to maybe address with worry or anxiety? Is there something else that you think, man, I wish we could say this, or I've not asked the right question, whatever that might be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think developing resilience is something that we can all work on. And mindset is really important, how we approach life, how we approach tasks. There's a famous Australian athlete called Ash Barty. She was the world #1 women's tennis player, I think last year, maybe after Williams.
Okay.
And she was really well trained in dealing with pressure and anxiety of being the world #1. Whenever the media asked her, how are you going to deal with the pressure? You're the world #1. What are you going to do today? How she would recognize that pressure only exists if she lets it exist. Her mindset was, I'm going to do my best. That's all I can do. The media hated that response. And then they would say, well, what kind of effort are you going to put in? My best effort. That's it. That's all I can do. When we realized that, that's all we can do. All we can do is our best. And her phrase was, give it a crack. Give it a go. So that's all we can do. And I think when we approach life with that mindset, we become resilient.
That's great. Thanks again, Abe.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Absolutely.
All right.